Happy quarantine, boys, girls, moms, dads, teachers, parents, anyone else who's interested. I realize these are uncharted times for just about every single person on earth, and we're all looking for ways to keep each other engaged, entertained, and most importantly, educated. Now, I am not a teacher. I studied to be a teacher for about 2 years. I graduated with a degree in history and have been studying history for about, going back to high school, which is, a couple of years, like 30. I figured let me offer my time. I wouldn't call it expertise. I wouldn't call it, a trade, obviously. I would never want to take away from the wonderful work that teachers do. Thank the higher powers every morning for some of the teachers that I've had, especially in the field of history. They've fostered a lifelong interest in the subject with me. So I'm going to try and give back because, hey, you don't need a license to just put a video on Facebook. So I'm going to start with a subject today that I'm pretty well versed in. This is geared towards children, I would say, between the grades of 2 and sophomore year in high school, maybe college. I suggest parents watch it first before sharing it with young children. I'm going to try and limit the language. Today's topic is going to be prohibition. Now, for those unaware, prohibition basically was... Well, not basically, it was an amendment, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And when you have an amendment to the Constitution, that becomes the law of the land. You can't really work around it. It's like our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom to pack our homes and our bodies with as many firearms as possible and inflict whatever damage we want on society, courtesy of the Second Amendment. And there's others, freedom of the press, right to not have unlawful search or seizure, right to remain silent, all that stuff. But prohibition was an amendment that said you can't have alcohol. And by alcohol, that means alcohol. You can't have whiskey. You can't have beer. Imagine that. Imagine living in that world. Luckily, we don't. But we're going to tell the story of how we got there. How we got to the point where there was no alcohol allowed. And how we got to the more reasonable point of, hey, let's let people have a drink. And I think in a time like this, we all appreciate the ability to have a drink, right? So all started around 1870. Roughly 250 years now. 150? Yeah, 150 years. There won't be any math lessons. There was this movement called the temperance movement. Now, what temperance means was refraining from alcohol. You would think that temperance would mean, hey, lower it, be temperate. No. Temperance was bad news. It was, you can't have a drop to drink. And there were 3 key players in that temperance movement. The Anti-Saloon League, which wanted to shut down saloons or bars of their day. Now, let's pretend this happened today. An Anti-Saloon League would want no Chili's, no Buffalo Wild Wings, no TGI Fridays, no Chuck E. Cheese. Now, I'm not a big fan of these places, but I'll defend their right to exist, and you should too. So that was the Anti-Saloon League in the 1870s. There was the Prohibition Party, which took the feelings of the Anti-Saloon League and became a political party. And you know what a political party is? It's like the Democrats or the Green Party, the Reform Party, the Libertarian Party, political parties that your mom and dad go vote for every year if they're being civically responsible, but at least every 4 years after being quasi-responsible, or maybe they don't vote. And then there was the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Now, there's a lot of mixed feelings about them. They came from a good spot. They were wives and daughters of some very bad guys who would occasionally drink too much and do bad things. But they wanted to get rid of all alcohol. If we were to draw a modern day comparison that you boys and girls might be familiar with, it's like the Taliban. They might believe they're doing something right, but they're really hurting everybody. So, you had those three factions coming together. You had the Anti-Saloon League, which was like a lobbyist, much like Big Pharma, Big Oil, Big Tobacco, the NRA. You had the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was like the Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. And then you had the Prohibition Party, which was the political wing who represented these beliefs. Now, like I said, they started in the 1870s because America was in a civil war. Now, I'm not sure where you are in your studies, but the Civil War was basically good guys up north, bad guys down south. Bad guys down south thought that people should be property and slaves. Good guys up north wanted to free the people down south. That put Prohibition and that movement on the back burner for quite some time. But the Civil War eventually ended. Or technically it didn't. We're still kind of fighting it, but we'll talk about that next week. Civil War ended, Prohibition becomes a thing. America now has railroads. They have rivers with boats. They're building canals. It's called industrialization. A lot of people were talking about this. It's called industrialization. That's when you had industry, this thing called industry. That's where people made things and then they would sell them. So there was a need for a lot more workers, which meant we needed immigrants. Now, an immigrant is someone who comes from a different country to live in a new country. Throughout all of history, immigrants have had problems when they've got here. Some people were very mean to them. Not nice people. Not nice people at all. Nice people are nice to immigrants, but mean people. Like the bad guys in the Civil War who were down south. Some of them went up north and they were mean to immigrants. Now, the one thing that's been true throughout American history, nice people always like immigrants. Remember that. Put that on any of your tests, you're going to get an A. But the one thing immigrants brought at this time was they liked to have a drink. They were coming from Ireland. They were coming from Germany. They were coming from Italy. You know, the Irish liked to drink a little whiskey. The Germans liked to drink some beer. The Italians liked to drink some wine. It was all good. Think of it like when you go out to eat. There's Korean barbecue, Mexican food, Chinese food, Thai food, German food. Food from all over come to America, and we have all these great restaurants because of it. Well, this happened with alcohol back in the late 19th century. But then you had those three players, right? The Women's Christian Temperance Union, Anti-Saloon League, and the Prohibition Party. They got in bed with another bad guy. That was called the Ku Klux Klan. Now, the Ku Klux Klan, I don't know how old you guys are. Ku Klux Klan is bad news. They would resort to attacking and sometimes killing people that look different. They would go after immigrants. They would go after Catholics. They would go after people of color, freed slaves at the time. And they had political power, down south where the bad guys were during the Civil War. And that power crept up and they got into our political system, and they pushed for prohibition. So you had the marriage of these four entities, some who started out with good intentions, most who were bad, get together, and they said, hey, let's have prohibition. Let's get rid of alcohol. And you would think that most Americans would be like, hey, no, man, I want to have a drink. I want to have a drink. But you'd be wrong. To pass a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the Congress, 2/3 of state legislatures to get together and say yes. But it happened. You had 66% of America say, no alcohol. We're starting prohibition. And that started in December of 1917. Now, your mom and dad probably saw a movie called 1917. Put that in perspective. You had young boys dying over in Europe in trenches, horrible conditions. And while that's going on over there, while America is getting ready to join that fight and help beat the bad guys, you had the Ku Klux Klan and their four friends working hard to get people to stop making, selling, and drinking alcohol. I know it sounds silly, but it was only 100 years ago. Believe it or not, that became the 18th Amendment, and it passed. On January 16th, 1920, the manufacture, distribution, sale, and possession of all alcohol became illegal. It was the first time there was a constitutional amendment, and the only time there was a constitutional amendment that actually stripped freedoms away from people. All of our other constitutional amendments give freedoms to people. The right to vote, the right to speak, the right to pray, the right to gather peaceably. But this one actually took freedoms away. And it took a long time to repeal. Because you know what happened? Once they started prohibition, the whole global economy, which is, how people make money and spend money, it got nice for a while because rich people were still able to drink, just like rich people are still able to do whatever the hell they want these days. But eventually, the economy crashed, and we got what we call the Great Depression. Nobody had work. Nobody had money. And then you had heroes, true American heroes, like John Rockefeller, who gets a bad rap. People think he was a bad guy who didn't pay people enough, and he might not have. But John Rockefeller led the charge to help repeal prohibition. LaGuardia, the mayor of New York City, you might know him better as an airport. He led the charge to repeal prohibition. And then there was a lion of a man, a true American patriot and hero, named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The best president we've probably had since Abraham Lincoln. Maybe Barack Obama, but hey, it's another episode. He became president and said, let the people have their drink. And lo and behold, we got 2/3 of the country, 2/3 of Congress to get together and say, yeah, this prohibition has been pretty stupid. Prohibition gave us the mafia and organized crime who was still selling alcohol to people, but they were doing it under the table. It was not being taxed, and people were dying because it led to gang wars. Finally, on the 5th of December in 1933, America passed the 21st Amendment, arguably their most important amendment since the end of the Civil War, because it ended prohibition. It was a declaration that we were stupid, we were wrong, we shouldn't have listened to the Prohibition Party or the Anti-Saloon League or the Women's Christian Temperance Union or the Ku Klux Klan. We're sorry. history, please forgive us, we have a new amendment. And now people could have a drink. And that brings us to almost 100 years later. Imagine life without it. Like I said, imagine no Buffalo Wild Wings, no corner bar, no beer at Yankee Stadium or at the Ice Capades or at your birthday party or the 4th of July or wine at like church or crap like that. No alcohol. Can you imagine that? No. Real Americans rose to the occasion. They said this is an eradication of our freedoms, and we thank them for it. And you should think about that lesson as you carry through your schooling and your life. Because just because the law says something, it doesn't have to be that way if enough people get together. And that's the beauty of America. And in the future days and weeks, I'll give you some more lessons on where America was right, where America was wrong, and where America is today and where the world is today and how you can make a difference. So I hope this was somewhat informative for you kids out there, and maybe you parents may have learned something. Send direct messages if there's any topic or subject you want me to discuss. I think we're all going to be here for a while. I'm looking forward to it. I get my strength and my will to keep on from the people close to me and the people out there in the virtual world and the kids who are leading the charge to a better tomorrow, because we kind of gave them a pretty shitty situation to come of age in. So hang tight, stay home, wash your hands, contact your parents, your grandparents, let everybody know how much you love them, and we are going to get through this together. So, on a side note, I would like to say sláinte and happy St. Patrick's Day to all out there who are celebrating. Normally you'd say, hey, be safe, watch how much you drink before you drive, but you don't have to worry about that this year. It's also been kind of condescending, St. Patrick's Day is the only holiday where people tell you to be safe. But, hey, we probably earned that ourselves, right? So, happy St. Patrick's Day. Never forget Prohibition. Never let it happen again. And I will speak to you all soon.